This is the second part of my interview with Professor Richard Gill. I'm just going to do a very short introduction today. I've included a biography of Professor Gill in the first part of this interview, which you can see on my channel. So we're just going to get straight into the conversation today. And I want to begin with something we didn't get to last time, which was, I think, a really interesting story about Vincent Marks that I think you can share about kind of the last days he was here, essentially.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it was like 2 weeks or 3 weeks before he actually died, and so he was had terminal cancer. He knew very well he was going to die, and I now when was it? That should be relevant, right? I can't remember when it was, but I think it was in the time when I was first active on internet. So it was during the trial. So it was during the trial somewhere in 2023, right? Because it started in 2020. And okay, I've no idea exactly when it was.
Hmm.
Well, we could look at when he died
Yeah, yeah.
and
So
then subtract 3 weeks.
yeah,
Yes.
it wouldn't be that difficult to find out.
No, it's not that difficult, but it's not too important at the moment.
Yeah.
But of course, now I had already been in touch with uh, Sarita Adams, and she told me like everything there is to know about immunoassay tests this insulin C-peptide business and so on. So I was already kind of well informed, but of course it was interesting to find out if what she said was correct by talking to experts in the field. And I emailed Vincent Marks. I didn't know he was ill or anything. I knew he was retired, but easy to find his email address. I emailed him, and I got a very friendly reply. And he, he told me his personal situation, and he also told me that, like, I mean, he was like waiting to die, and he was like sleeping most of the time. But he basically thanked me for contacting him with scientific questions because that kind of gave him, uh, well, it lightened up his life. And these were the last days of his life. So he really loved to have an opportunity to stop thinking about his impending death and sleeping and stuff and goodbyes to family or whatever, all that kind of thing. He was very, very, very lucid and very sort of really there with his mind in his mind, and he loved the opportunity to talk about his big thing, which is this insulin stuff. And okay, so we had a nice conversation, and the most sort of important thing which he wanted to tell me and told me straight away was that in his opinion, there was only one other real forensic insulin expert around in the world now, and that was Alan Wayne Jones, who he greatly admired, and he basically, sort of anointed him as his successor. So Alan Wayne Jones was the right person to go to, and I don't remember. Yeah, I knew about his. He had already published a paper by that time on the insulin in the Colin Norris case, right? So I probably had not contacted Alan Wayne Jones yet then. I did later. So I knew Alan Wayne Jones is the guy to go to, especially if one wants to have, well, yeah, if you want to have an expert to give new evaluation of the results which are still there, because obviously Vincent Marks himself was not going to be writing any more scientific reports or anything. What else? It was a pleasant conversation. He was disturbed by the fact that it seemed to be the case that Lucy Letby was, well, that an immunoassay was yet again going to be the main thing in a nurse murder trial. He found that disturbing, and and we chatted a little bit, and he told me a little bit about his work, the work he'd done for the Bev Allitt case, which I think was kind of the summit of his career.
Mm.
He certainly made him very famous. And and I think I'd already found his paper, Marx and with Gwen Walk, which we mentioned in the last interview. So uh, yeah, and I think he said some nice things about Gwen Walk as well. So that didn't tell me anything new, really. What one thing he did say I found striking and kind of rang a bell. Well, it did ring a bell, which was that he was so impressed in the Bev Allitt case by the statistical evidence against
Right.
Bev Allitt. Now, I've never looked at that, but kind of he he was sort of convinced that she was guilty, not by his own work, because his own work only showed, in his opinion, that a child had received insulin which it should not have, which had not been prescribed, right? Factitious insulin, what's it? So he agreed that a child had been poisoned with insulin, but of course he was not the guy to say who had done it. And he himself, he sort of thinks he's happy to imagine that Bev Allitt was correctly convicted because he kind of trusts what the statistician had done, if there was a statistician. I don't know. So I found that
Mm.
rather remarkable because I think that there are definitely weaknesses in the Bev Allitt case, and I mean, if it wasn't for the Lucy Letby case, I would probably be busy trying to look up what was the actual statistical evidence.
Mm.
And I never got around to doing that, and I really don't want to, kind of. I mean, one reason I don't want to is because people have told me again and again, do not get involved in the Bev Allitt case because that will just discredit what you're doing for
Mm.
Lucy Letby.
Yeah, I mean, I have that concern. I think that what I would say about it is once someone has confessed, unless you can ex prove that a false confession was extracted,
Well, there is
it,
plenty of evidence that it could have been a false confession.
yeah,
Plenty of evidence. Sorry, there's plenty of evidence that that confession doesn't mean very much at all. And
sure.
in that confession, she did not explain how she'd done this, that, or the other. So it's as evidence, it is
Right.
actually worthless. So sorry, Chris, I'm going to correct you there.
Okay. No,
Of course, it's a
that's absolutely
reason
fine.
for it,
I don't know
it,
much about that case, so
yeah, no, I mean, well, and another thing I want to say about the Bev Allitt case while we're at it is that there's another disturbing parallel with the Lucy Letby case, which I think should be mentioned, which is that there were two consultants, pediatricians on that hospital unit. It was a children's ward, and they were engaged in a bitter battle. And one of them supported Bev Allitt all the way through, and the other one was the one who believed she was a killer nurse. But the unit where she was working was chaos because every week those two consultants alternated who was on duty, and every week all the instructions to the nurses were reversed for all the patients,
hmm.
the care of all the patients. That unit was a bad place to be, you know. It not many people know this, and I do believe somebody who wrote a book on the Bev Allitt case was also more or less convinced that she was probably innocent, and this was one of the important things which came out of journalistic investigation. So there's certain, and I have always said and will always say that's a case which needs to be carefully researched in good time, probably after she's died or something like that,
Yeah.
because and not now. I mean, anybody who wants to, they
Hmm.
should go ahead, but it should ultimately be carefully looked at again by independent people. And there are many indications that things are There are many fishy things in there.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Um,
Okay.
so with that being said, let's talk about the statistics in the
Yes.
Lucy Letby case.
Yes.
Um, so very simple question to begin with. Why are the statistics wrong, misleading in the Lucy Letby case?
The statistics are misleading because what are the statistics? That, of course, many people say they're not statistics because they're just data, right? But they are statistics because they've been produced from from much larger data sets by some process, and they are a graphical, you could say, a graphical representation of the claim that Lucy was always there when bad things happened. So they are a graphical summary of a statistical analysis, whose aim is to show that there is an incredible correlation between bad events happening and Lucy Letby being present. So why are they misleading? Well, there's a little footnote at the bottom of the spreadsheet which describes what the spreadsheet is supposed to be, because there's supposed to be a spreadsheet of um, all the suspicious events. I think I can't remember exactly. I would have to quickly look at my own picture of the spreadsheet. Do you remember what's written at the bottom?
No, no, I don't.
No. Well,
I haven't gone into it in that depth, given that I'm not statistician, you
no.
know.
Well, let me see if I can find it. Well, maybe not now. Okay, but anybody who looks at the
Hmm.
spreadsheet, I recommend they look at the bottom line.
Okay.
And I think the bottom line is basically an untruth. It says something like these are all the
Yeah.
suspicious events,
Yeah.
and yeah, the rows are all the suspicious events.
Yes.
But we know now they're not because Dowie Evans found plenty more suspicious events.
Hmm.
We now know.
Well, he's even in his most recent interview, he openly stated he thinks she killed 12 more infants,
Right.
so, or attempted to, killed or attempted to. He didn't specify which, but he said there's 12 other
Okay,
infants.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, we know very well that Dowie Evans believes that there are more suspicious events. There are more events which he thinks are suspicious, and he was the key, forensic, medical forensic researcher for the police. So, so that's a lie, saying that these are all the suspicious events. It suggests that it's all the deaths. And we know very well it's not all the deaths because there are about 10 other deaths than seven or eight which are there. It's also a lie because there are deaths which Lucy got convicted of having caused, but which I don't think she was actually present on the unit at the time they happened. I haven't checked that recently. Lately, I just have to look at it again. Sorry, I mean I haven't been looking at this
hmm.
again recently, but uh, it's certainly misleading in the sense that many people have seen that spreadsheet in the newspapers and believe that Lucy Letby was there at all the deaths.
Yeah, and I want to be clear on something at this point as well.
Yeah,
People will say, "Oh, it wasn't important in the prosecution case." I mean, I've never thought that was a credible argument,
no,
but it is used very prominently very early on in the closing statement of the prosecution.
yes,
So also all the way through the case, they keep
yes,
saying, "Oh, we know Lucy was always on duty. We can infer from this that Luke. So
mm,
it was used a lot,
yes,
fundamentally.
I agree. It was used a lot in the trial. I believe it was shown to the court on the first day of the trial or opening first days of the trial. And journalists asked for permission to put it to publish it. They asked the judge permission, and he gave it. So the judge thought it was pretty important. He thought the whole UK public should be allowed to see it, right? Not just the people in the court. Um, by the way, the police call it a statistical analysis, and they hired an expensive IT company to produce it for them. So yeah, and indeed it came up in the closing comments of the closing arguments of the prosecution, and it's one of the sort of the three things: the insulin, she was always there, the note,
Mm.
which are which have convinced the public
Mm.
that she's guilty,
Yeah.
or have convinced the public. Maybe the public is changing its mind now.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Um, so
But why are they wrong? I
yeah,
should say why they're wrong. But this also gets on to the question: why was Jane Hutton not commissioned?
yeah,
Because why are they wrong? Because um, in an if you're going to use if you want to prove that there is a connection between a correlation, if you want to prove there really is a correlation between the bad events happening and somebody's presence, you have got to investigate that in a sound way to avoid confirmation bias, to avoid the famous Texas sharpshooter
yeah.
paradox, which is,
Just
the
to just
Texas,
explain that briefly, just to explain
yeah,
what
the
it is.
Texas sharpshooter paradox. It's sort of the same as what actually happened, but it's drawing a circle around the no, well, it is drawing a circle. It's the Texas sharpshooter was a story which was, sort of going the rounds of the pubs of Texas, that there had been this sharpshooter who, no, there had been these amazing barn doors seen where there was this cluster of bullets, and in the middle of a sort of chalked in or painted in bullseye on the door of the barn, the Texas barn door. And so this was like an urban legend, but the urban legend goes on to say at some point people were talking about it in some Texas pub bar, and uh, the person, one of the people there was actually the person who had done it, and he explained how he'd done it, which was he stood a number of feet away from a barn door, let off a volley of shots, and then walked to the door and chalked in a bullseye around the shots, around the bullet holes. So that's the Texas barn door fallacy, and it's used as a popular word for the idea of finding an evidence, finding some no, having a suspect. There's something you want to prove, and having a suspect in mind, and then just showing the evidence which you can collect, which supports it, kind of thing. It's kind of a not a good analogy, really, if you think about it, but it is something which you can imagine, and it is kind of what went on, right? There were suspicions. It is the situation when you suspect somebody's doing something bad, and then you go out and look for evidence, select little bits of evidence which support that, and leave out what doesn't support it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
It's working backwards instead of forwards, isn't it?
it's working backwards. It is working backwards instead of forwards, yes. And the Texas Bandor fallacy is a very good example of that. It's also about deducing causation from correlation, because, like and thinking something is the cause and something else is the effects, when actually it's the other way around. So sort of reverse causation. So now it is very like the Lucy Letby case, because we know really that many of those events were only thought to be suspicious because Lucy was there. And in many cases, they were thought to be suspicious because she was there, because she was always there when suspicious things happened. So it's not just reverse causation, it's circular causation.
Yeah,
Uh,
with regard to that, I've been preparing a video this week, and I was looking at the case
yeah,
of Child M. Now,
yeah,
she wasn't found guilty on that,
right,
but to say that was a suspicious incident is,
mm,
in my estimation, ridiculous.
right,
And of course, in this case, there's a lot of focus on the deaths, understandably, but
yes,
she's facing multiple life sentences because
yeah,
an infant collapsed on a neonatal unit,
yes,
which is staggering, frankly.
yeah. I mean, you could say it's suspicious in the sense that it deserves inspection,
Of course.
investigation, right? It arouses suspicion, but that's not the same as calling it suspicious after you've investigated. It should no longer have been thought to be suspicious
Yeah. And
anymore.
and as we've discussed, if those were your criteria, then
Yeah.
there should be about 6 or 7 nurses from Council Chester in prison because
Yeah.
there were other collapses. So
Yes.
why isn't there a court case against them? Obviously
Yeah.
there shouldn't be. Obviously there shouldn't be. But
Yeah. Now,
um,
the other thing about this is that another misleading thing about this thing, very misleading thing, I think, even kind of even more important, is the fact that all those nurses in the spreadsheet, and of course, another thing is it's only the nurses and not the doctors, all those nurses who are different kinds of nurses who had different numbers of hours and even worked in the unit for different numbers of days or weeks or months. There were also part-time nurses. There were bank nurses, which means nurses who've been fired but who are happy to come back when it's a bit busy. There were agency nurses, which are very expensive nurses, which you need a lot of because you've fired too many nurses. And so you keep having to bring in nurses because it's too busy. It's one of the reasons why everything is going to the dogs in the NHS, because they've been so cost cutting that they are making more costs on temporary staff all the
hmm,
time, which is bad for the costs, but also means you all the time you're having to get new nurses introduced to how it works on this particular unit and in this particular hospital. So it's incredibly wasteful way of staffing a hospital. Yeah. So I mean, if there had been a serious statistical investigation, it would first of all have needed a an objective criteria for calling for labeling a an event as a suspicious event, which does not, and by objective, I don't mean that such a thing has a kind of universal objective definition, but a working definition which any person qualified enough to understand the words which are written there, right, can verify, and which does not refer in any way to which nurses are present or whatever. You should have a criterion whereby you can go through all the medical records, or if you like, all the shifts of, and especially all the hours of all the days on that unit, and determine whether or not there is a sound reason to call a certain event a suspicious event. If you can find it and label it suspicious. Then you put that to once on that. You have that on one side, and then you have the nurses' shifts on the others. Now you can look to see if there's an association between the events which seem to be odd or seem to require further investigation, which might be suspicious, right? Might be suspicious. The events which might be suspicious, and the nurses who are working there. And when you look for a correlation, you will take account of the fact that some nurses work many hours and some nurses work few hours. And we did that in the Daniela Poggiali case
hmm,
because uh, in the Daniela Poggiali case we were only talking about deaths. So we had a list of all deaths. The problem turned out to be the times of the deaths, which weren't the times of deaths at all, but the times of an administrative bureaucratic action by a qualified person signing a piece of paper, with bureaucratic consequences, like it's important to know what day somebody died on, because of all kinds of well, even for writing the date on the tombstone, it, it's needed for all kinds of purposes,
sure.
bureaucratic and financial and so on.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think
Uh,
this point
but
that it,
I think I'm missing something, but I'm not quite sure what it is at the moment. But I no doubt will come.
yeah, don't worry, I'm sure we'll get there.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so one of the points you made that I think is really critical is that, obviously, I mean, I've written about this in my book, but there are bank nurses, there are part-time nurses, there are agency nurses. So
Yes.
obviously that's not ideal for a hospital anyway. But
No.
Surely, sure. I mean, I happen to be quite good at maths, and I
Yeah,
happen to be reasonably bright. So,
yeah,
obviously, I would think if I was doing a statistical study, if I were working for Cheshire Police by some horrible twist of fate,
yeah,
um, I would say, hold on a second,
yeah,
this has no merit because obviously the people who are part-time are not going
yeah.
to be there all the time.
Yes,
Obviously. So,
obviously,
so
it's
why
so
would you
it's
why
so
would they not
swear
spot?
word obvious.
Yeah.
How could they have thought that this was the thing to do? But and I mean, it seems to have convinced intelligent people as well as stupid people. In fact, I mean, it's often the case that it's less educated people who immediately understand that this is bullshit,
Hmm.
that this is really flawed.
Yeah.
You, you don't need to be educated to see that this is stupid.
No. No, not at all.
And and how could the police not? Or well, okay, I don't know. I mean, it's very
Hmm.
shameful. The police thought this was such a big find, but the CPS, those are supposed to be pretty educated, careful, and one would have hoped wise people. But why the hell did they think that this was something?
Yeah.
Uh,
So I mean,
that's
I have a
yeah,
theory about that,
okay.
but um, so basically, the CPS has a two-stage check,
Yeah,
two-stage process. The second part rather is just is this in the public interest?
yeah.
So that's gone immediately. For this case, that was never even a test. So you've got a one-part process. And as
Which
far as
one? Sorry, because it was in the public interest.
well, if they believe that,
Yeah, if they believed there was a serial killer there, it was very much in the
yeah,
public interest. Yeah,
that's undeniable.
that's undeniable. I agree.
So that's gone immediately.
Yes.
So they have to just do the one point process really, which is they just look at the evidence, but they don't, they don't have scientists, they don't have,
No.
so I think essentially they look at this case and they just think, wow, look at this massive pile of evidence we've been given,
Yes.
and they just assess it quantitatively, really, rather than
Well, they
qualitatively.
assess will this convince a jury, and
Yeah.
they were right because it did convince the
Yeah, yeah, so
jury.
they could even argue they were correct to send it
Yes,
to court.
they were correct. It
But
did convince the jury.
but yeah, I think they just if you put a massive pile of evidence in front of the
Mm.
CPS, they will just
Mhm.
send it to court. Pretty much, I would say they will almost always send it to court.
Yes, I think so too. I agree, and they're just not taking the time to think, really, or somebody isn't. Maybe somebody is, I mean, but maybe they're overruled by other people.
Yeah.
And there is enormous pressure
Hmm.
because at the time it goes to the CPS, public already knows about this, right?
Yeah.
The police have already been broadcasting that they're investigating a serial killer and even letting us see pictures of her,
Yeah. Which is
um,
to me is totally wrong.
which is totally wrong. And the newspapers are merrily going along, and yeah, so people just get carried away, don't they?
Yeah, we should mention on this point, for example, I only saw this the other day. I mean, I'd seen it before, but I'd forgotten about it.
Mm.
When Lucy was not charged but arrested, and
Mm.
then from then on she had to report to the police station every so often.
Yes.
I think she was banned from living in Chester. Someone told me. That's
Okay.
why they only showed that one arrest from
Right.
her house because
Okay.
she had to go and live with her parents, and she was banned
Well,
from living in Chester. So I've been told.
well,
But yeah, they paparazzi or the local press or someone photographed her going into the police station.
yes.
In like she had quite a fetching like straw hat on and stuff. And
Yes.
they're just outside. Now one would wonder,
And they wrote she sneaked in.
yeah. I mean, understandably, you know, you wouldn't want a marching band and say, "Here I am at the police station." You'd want
Yeah.
to get in and out, wouldn't you? Really,
Yes.
particularly if you're innocent. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think
Well, yes, the paparazzi. Now, the day before yesterday, was it? There was the article in first in the Birmingham something, and then in the Mirror, with the interview with like the prison guard
yeah,
uh, who was responsible for keeping an eye on her the first night she was in jail or something. And he found it very odd because she wasn't screaming blue murder because she had been wrongly arrested and she looked very haggard and pale and so on.
Mm.
Well, my God, uh, I, why did the newspaper publish this?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it will. Their readers will love it. I
I mean,
suppose their readers will love it.
it's just clickbait, isn't it, really, essentially?
It is, but it's horrible.
It's wrong, it's totally
It's
wrong, but
keeping the myth alive,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I think
and
now,
it's utterly despicable. It's disgraceful. I mean, it's a real
yeah,
disgrace. Should write some complaints to what is it, IPLOS or something? I mean,
yeah.
anyway, yeah,
They don't do anything because they will just say they're just reporting on something that happened. They're
yeah,
entitled to
well,
do it, so.
yeah.
But yeah, it's
This
bad.
guy talked to a reporter, so it's news.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Yeah,
with regards to the chart,
yeah.
so I've heard various opinions from statisticians on this matter. Um,
Mm.
do you think, that chart can only be produced by having a hypothesis in your head before you begin, and then
Yeah,
producing a chart that fits the hypothesis, essentially?
yeah. I think so. I think that's very very obvious. Yes,
Yeah,
I think that was obvious from the start, and has only become more obvious. And it's a beautiful illustration of how clueless the police were. I mean, okay, they were convinced. Sure, they thought this. They knew this was the case of their careers, and they won prizes for it. I understand.
mm. Yeah, that's true. They won
Yeah,
awards, so
they won awards, and they think they did like a perfect investigation, and they boast about it and in their publications. So it's very sad.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, why did they get it so wrong, do you think?
Well, I think we kind of covered that from enthusiasm.
Yeah,
They,
yeah,
well, I mean, I think they were fooled by the doctors.
yeah.
I believe, and I've said it a number of times in public, so I could say it again. I think Breary and Jairam lied to the police at their very first meetings with the police because, as as far as I mean, as I think Jairam or Breary have even said this in interviews, so we can check that they said this. They told the police that there had been so many deaths and collapses which were inexplicable, and that they never had so many. Usually it was two or three a year, and they couldn't explain it. Now, I think they could explain it, or should have easily been able to explain it. Well, maybe not Jairam because he was away doing his TV stuff, but Breary was the guy who collected the data every year and sent it into Embrace and so on. And if you now look at the list of the babies, um, the deaths which Thurwell has produced, right? There's a spreadsheet with 18 cases there. One of them is a baby who died in the maternity unit. So there's like 17 deaths in the Lucy Letby time frame. And only 7 of them are deaths she's supposed to have caused, or maybe 8, I always remember. That means there are 8 or so other ones. And if you just go look at the causes of the deaths, uh, especially if you look you look at the causes of the deaths. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, you can concentrate on the ones which are not associated with Lucy Letby. Just look at the causes of the death and the prematurities of the babies and the birth weights of the babies and various issues reported, which turn up in post-mortems and coroner's reports and so on, like the official causes of death. Those deaths are not surprising at all. They, to an amateur, they're not surprising. And yesterday, I showed the list to an expert in fetal medicine. He wasn't surprised at all. The, give an expert in fetal medicine and in twins and multiples.
Mm.
You just look at those babies, and many of them might have had a chance at a level 3
Mm.
unit, and most
Yeah.
of them had no chance at a level 1 unit, which effectively Countess of Chester was. Now, if Breary is the neonatology lead on that hospital, he must have the knowledge and experience to realize that many of those deaths are not inexplicable. What was inexplicable was the fact that there were so many. I agree. That is what needed to be explained. But he and Jairam deliberately, I believe, made the police understand that there was no possible explanation, normal explanation for this spike in deaths. So the police know there has been inexplicable and enormous, incredible spike in deaths. Uh, what are they supposed to do? And who are they supposed to trust? They trusted those doctors. Now that was stupid because those doctors were possibly can be considered witnesses, of course, and they are experts in a sense, but they're not independent expert witnesses. But they uh, uh, basically ran the police investigation, or you could say Dowie Evans did, and where the boundary between those persons is a matter of debate. Whether or not Breary and Jairam suggested Evans to the police, I don't know. Could have been, could have been, but there's no proof of it.
Mm.
So, but it doesn't really matter. They certainly had kind of professional connections because they're all pediatricians, and it's a small world. And they're
Yeah.
pediatricians. Well, okay, Mid Wales is far from Chester, but the Welsh pediatricians had a conference in Chester,
Yeah.
and there's a grapevine, so word spreads even if there's not a direct contact.
Yeah.
Yeah. So why did police get things so wrong? Because the police were so gullible and
Yeah.
enthusiastic, and because it was a very emotive, emotional case.
Yeah. I think
Obviously, so
so.
it
So I
was
think
important to do it really well, and they
yeah.
screwed up.
I think with regard to what you said, one of the things that occurs to me and has occurred to me from what I've seen them say
Hmm.
is that they see things in very black and white terms.
Yeah.
So they look for a singular cause.
Yes.
For example, there's a comment in the Operation Hummingbird film about it's Paul Hughes and he's saying, "I wanted to know if there was a bug on the unit."
Yeah.
Which is fine. That's fine. But
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be entirely caused by a bug on the unit or
No.
entirely caused by a nurse.
Yes.
It could even be both. Those things are not even mutually exclusive.
No.
And then also, obviously, it can be caused by a complex medical picture of interweaving factors,
Yes.
which is what it is caused by.
Which is
Um,
what it is caused by,
but
and
he
not just.
sees they
Uh,
see it,
uh,
I think, in very
yeah.
dogmatic terms of
Yes,
it
it's
has to be this
kind of
or
what the police are trained to do is sort of
yeah.
look for the one thing, and they're perhaps reasonably good at finding out who stuck a knife in somebody else and that kind of thing. And of course, yeah, this is the problem with such cases. These are deaths at a place where people do die. This is not a kind of situation which police have any experience with at all.
Yeah. Yeah,
It's
that's
it's
probably a big
totally
factor.
out of their film field of experience. They are almost always brought in when it's pretty clear there really was a crime.
Yeah, and
Um,
that would
and by the way, they should have the experience to realize that the person who reports the crime is often the one who did it.
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean
they didn't even take account of that bit
that's
of
a
their.
critical point. Critical point. I mean, they should have been under suspicion as much
Yes,
as
they
anyone
should
else, of
not have
course.
trusted those guys,
Yeah.
and they should have found out and known about the RCPCH investigation and about the complaint, etc., etc. Because if they had investigated properly the situation in the hospital, they would have found out that there were a lot of very fishy things there.
Yeah, and they were informed of this. Um,
I suppose so.
no,
Yeah.
they were. They definitely were. I know for a
Yeah.
fact. Um,
Good. Well, that's something, but they
but they
chose
just
to
they just
ignore it.
ignored it. They just ignored it. So
Well, they found the miracle doctor from Wales
yeah,
who managed to put his finger exactly on all those cases and made it so simple for them.
yeah. So we're gonna
And then all they needed to do was to find medical experts who would sign off on what Dowie had done,
hmm,
which happened, which is like the next thing.
yeah,
And okay, and then you have to get the CPS to swallow it. Well, we already talked about that. Now they may need to have the case tried by a judge who sees things also in kind of black and white, and
yeah,
who's kind of it's very complex, of course. So what do? You simplify things, and I would say that what Goss did in his mind was, and in agreement with the barristers, we'll agree that we're going to look at each case, each indictment, each accusation separately on their own medical merits. Now, I think that's wrong, but it's a kind of decision which a very black and white thinking person would do.
hmm,
I'm going. Let's look just at incident number one, and then let's look at incident number two. And each time, let's see if we can find out medically if it's if Lucy did it. And that is basically what happened. That's how the trial went, indictment by indictment, all through the list of babies. And uh, Goss, but Goss made it worse by not allowing the defense to give a kind of interleaved a commentary on the prosecution's claim, baby by baby, right? So the prosecution did babies A through Q. And then the defense had a chance. But that's ridiculous. That is so stupid, but that is really stupid, I think. I mean, that's really just
hmm,
dumb and mean. And it could mean that he was certain that Lucy was guilty, so he just wanted to get it all over with as fast as possible because it was going to last a bloody long time anyway, and it's very expensive, and so on and so on. So, and he likes to do things effectively and efficiently. So I suppose he was driven by kind of efficiency motivations.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but yes.
I mean,
So
that's a generous. I mean, that's being generous, isn't it?
no,
To say that, I think.
I try to be generous if I can. Or have an opportunity. I mean, yeah, I think one may make generous remarks as well,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
and should
I
not only.
always and I always try to do that. I always try to
Yeah,
be as generous as possible to the prosecution, to the police, even to
yeah.
Dr. Evans.
Even
It's just
Dr. Evans
difficult. It's
says
diff
it.
it's just difficult.
I,
Um,
yes, I think that I kind of understand Dowie Evans' personality pretty well, I think, and I
hmm,
understand how he does what he does, and he has some qualities which one can quite admire. I mean, he's sort of plucky and obstinate,
yeah,
and yeah, of course, he has a lot of poor qualities as well.
sure.
But I mean, I even think it's kind of good of him that he changes his mind about what happened in various events.
Hmm,
That's honest. It's
yeah,
honest, and it's a scientific attitude.
yeah,
If you're a scientist and you get more information about one of those cases, you should revise your opinion. Now, the lawyers don't like that, and it's sort of very, bo- it really confuses the legal process, which works with a collection of documents which are fixed and a set of evidence which is fixed, and the legal machine can't cope with moving goalposts.
yeah. So
It, it,
we're gonna discuss
yeah.
the role of Dr. Evans. So I want to start by
Yeah. Yes.
asking you a specific question. So
Right.
we mentioned already that Lucy Letby was named as a suspect in
Mm.
2018.
Yes,
That's known to be the case.
yes,
Even her image has been in the press
yeah,
by this stage.
yeah,
Now, Dr. Evans has always made this claim that, oh, I didn't have a slightest clue that Lucy was involved.
yes,
And then by 2018, I'd already decided that she was guilty, so it didn't matter. That's essentially his argument.
yes,
But he continues working on the cases for 2 years, at least 2 years after that, because they're still arrested her for the third time in November
yes,
2020. And then he's even revising
yes.
his opinion in court, and then he's even revising his opinion after the court case.
Well,
So,
in his defense, I will say the following.
okay.
Um, okay, so at some point he was given all those uh, sort of no, I'm not quite sure exactly when. At some point, he had his first stack of medical notes, right? And that's when he saw it in the police station, or he, over a cup of coffee, he decided he saw the first one and saw that it was clearly murder, right? In 10 minutes. Um, we have to ask the question, who compiled that stack of notes? And I believe the answer is Breary, with of course some secretarial and supporting assistance, but I would imagine that like Breary was the guy masterminding the collection, a collation of materials to go to the police. And police, so there had been, I mean, the case had been reported to the police, and we're told the police asked for the medical notes of the babies involved in all the deaths, all the deaths, and all the suspicious events. That's what they asked for, because they'd been told there were suspicious events. Okay, now what do you suppose the suspicious events were? They were the events which, from the mythical drawer of doom, I suppose. What more could there have been than the things which Breary had on his mind, and maybe a few added, with a few added which his colleagues mentioned to him or something. So and why were they suspicious events? They were suspicious events because Lucy was there, and because Lucy had been under suspicion since June, I think, of 2015, right, when there were like 3 deaths and one collapse in 2 weeks, and they were like saying already, "Gosh, we already had our 3 deaths this year." And doctors, I understand, junior doctors were gossiping about nurse death, or whatever they were calling her, something like that. I mean, they all had ordinary low-level people working on the unit had associated those events with Lucy and told Breary. I mean, and Breary heard that at some, this whatever kind of meetings they hold in such a place. So the stack of medical notes which Dowie Evans analyzed contained a number of deaths which are completely obviously natural, which we now know how natural they were, and that they were that existed because of Thirlwell, because we have the list now.
Yeah.
And as he said, I put them on one side immediately. Congenital malformations, which means the baby's just going to die immediately, almost. Yes, of course, maybe Lucy did something, but we don't spend our time on them. He put them aside. What was left were basically the deaths, which are a bit odd, and where Lucy was present because she was mostly present because she was present so often anyway, and the other events which Breary found odd. So, of course, it is perfectly plausible that he said, "Now let's pull out the nurse roster or something. Now let's look at which nurses were there and which doctors are there, as far as I know. I don't know. Let's see who was there." And of course, Lucy was there lots and lots of the times. Maybe not all the times, but at a huge mass of the times. So I'm not surprised. I think he could be telling the truth there.
Hmm.
part of the truth. Now, and as we know, he later got a second batch of medical notes and he found another 10 or whatever suspicious events. And this time, apparently, police didn't bother to investigate them. Maybe they thought they had enough, or maybe they just didn't see Lucy's name written there enough.
Hmm.
So that's a point where I would like to defend Dr. Dowie Evans. That I think he said something which could be the truth on that occasion.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah. By the way, his first names are David Richard, and my first names are Richard David. That's another coincidence. But anyway,
yeah, I've never fully established why he insists on calling himself Dowie.
oh, that's
Um,
Welsh. That's what Welsh people call somebody whose name is David.
oh, right, right. I see.
Right,
But he
he's
was supposed
Welsh, and he's very proud of being Welsh, and he
yeah,
loves
yeah. Well, he's
being
Plaid
Welsh.
Cymru, isn't he, and all that? So,
Yeah, exactly. He's
I
yeah.
mean, if things had worked out differently,
Mm.
he could have become the leader of Plaid Cymru, and he would never have been in this court case.
But yeah,
And he
I'm
clearly
not
had
sure if that's a
ambition.
good thing or a bad thing.
Well, I don't know. It would have its own knock-on effects, but
Yes.
it would be better for Lucy, I feel.
Yeah, it would
Um,
be. That's a Lucy, yes. Yeah.
um, yeah.
This
So
reminds me of the movie Lola Runs, which we mustn't waste time on, but that's about how tiny deviations in what happens can have enormous,
yeah,
far-reaching effects later.
yeah.
Yeah.
Or Sliding Doors, obviously a more mainstream
Yeah.
film.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah.
so while we're on the topic of Dr. Evans, now I already know the answer to this anyway, but while we've
Okay.
got someone on who's an actual scientist,
Right.
um, the Dr. Bohin is called
Oh,
in.
may I first correct another lie which is told about
Okay.
Darwin?
Yes, please do.
People say he never published any papers. This is not
Okay.
true. He has got 7 papers peer-reviewed in decent journals,
Okay.
most of them from quite a long time ago,
Right.
like, and many of them with many co-authors.
Okay. So
But
that's
he
fair.
has published scientific papers.
Yeah. I remember, I actually need to edit the part of my book where I've said that he didn't
Right, good.
because I saw you point this out previously.
Yeah,
So I think, we must deal with him fairly, of course.
of course we
Um,
must.
I think it's clear that he's not in the same league as the people in the panel.
That's very clear, yes.
But we should have, I've tried to say, I do respect the fact he's a pediatrician. I know it's not easy to qualify to be a pediatrician.
Yeah.
I'm sure I've no reason to believe he was a bad pediatrician. I don't know whether he was good, bad, or indifferent, but
Well,
um,
yeah, we know his involvement in
well,
other
I know.
family court cases
Yeah, yeah,
make one dubious about that. But
yeah. I haven't got into that too. I mean, I have
no.
mentioned the court cases, but
Yes.
I know there are other cases that people, you know,
Mm.
feel strongly about. And I don't disagree with that, but I've tried not to get into that because
Yeah,
frankly, it's too
I agree.
contentious.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I think we should be fair and acknowledge where he's, that he's not completely unqualified,
No.
but also it was nearly 20 years since now it is nearly 20 years since he's worked in a hospital. I mean,
Yes.
I would question whether he should be an expert witness at the time that he was called
Yeah.
into this case, really,
Yeah.
given how long he'd
At
been.
the time, it was like maybe 10 years when he was
Yeah,
first.
yeah. By the
Yeah.
time he's in court, though, it's 15 years,
Yes.
um, which is, surely too long.
Could be. Yeah. And I think yes. Yeah. I think it is clear it was too long. It didn't need to have been too long, but he didn't have enough really recent acquaintance with what goes on in an intensive care unit.
Yeah, so I'm now going to read you
Yes.
a paragraph that is written in the Court of Appeal verdict.
Hmm.
This won't be new to you, but I just want to read this out in case
Yeah.
people haven't heard this before. So it says Dr. Evans remained the lead expert throughout the investigation and trial. His conclusions were peer reviewed by Dr. Bohin, a currently practicing consultant neonatologist from Guernsey. Her specific instructions were to peer review the work and statements submitted by Dr. Evans using his statements, additional material, and access to the same medical files he used in forming his opinion.
Hmm.
So it goes on to give further. Also, I will read the last bit. To provide a robust clinical review of Dr. Evans' opinions, setting out whether she agreed or disagreed with him, and as appropriate, to provide an alternative causation for the
Mm,
collapse. So I have argued, and I've spoken to many credentialed people,
mm.
and we all agree that this cannot be reasonably be described as a peer review because you can't just pass someone's conclusions over to another person and then say, right, do you agree with them or not? And it says here in the
Uh, yeah,
quote.
I kind of disagree a bit there.
Okay, so
Uh,
tell me your view then.
yeah, well, and at the same time, I want to say she did not do the peer review she should have done because I
Right.
don't believe she gave alternative reasons for these collapses, and there were many.
Okay.
Right, we know thanks to the work of the neonatologists with Shu Li in the lead that she did not, she cannot possibly have done what she was asked to do.
Okay.
So that's absolutely clear. Um, now, well, look, in science, I'm often peer reviewing papers, and I read the paper,
Hmm.
and I can, and if I've got enough time, I verify the arguments, and I sort of verify the plausibility, and I try not to take account of the fame of the person who wrote the paper. Actually, I try to know it because I'm much more sort of lenient and helpful and prepared to do more work for a young author from a developing country than from some famous guy. So I do good in okay, but yeah, in scientific peer review of papers for journals, you do not verify everything, and you cannot verify anything. You go through, you look for things which seem obviously wrong and missing things, and you have your own experience in the field, and you might do some literature search and so on, and you check verified arguments, and basically you verify if things have the ring of truth and do various spot checks and so on. But um, what would a peer review have been? It would should have been or could have been. I mean, I think it's a bit odd to even use the word, but you can read, study Evans's analysis, whatever you want to call it, diagnosis, and look back in the medical paper, in the medical notes to see if what he's saying seems to be supported by what is there. Um, you can do that. That could be enough. But you should also do what was asked, which was to provide possible alternative. Right now, doing that as well would require going very deeply into the original medical notes. And I don't suppose Bowen did that because I suppose that if she had seriously taken this pack of medical notes for baby this, that, or the other, and actually trying to look at them through fresh eyes, I suppose if she's a good pediatrician, which I don't know, but if she's a reasonably good pediatrician, she would have seen that there were alternative explanations for what had happened. So it's clear to me she did not do what was asked. But what she did was apparently just enough to allow her to be able to sign off. And it probably cost her the amount of hours which was all the police was going to pay her for, you know.
Hmm.
I mean, a review of the scale which Shuli's team of neonatologists did would have cost the police an enormous amount of money
And then killed the case as well.
and killed the case. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, and killed the case. Yes.
So,
So does
so
that answer your question?
yeah, it does. It does. So my contention is,
Mm,
in my view, she should have done. There should have been a blind peer review, and she should have looked at the notes.
Mm.
And I believe
Yeah.
if she'd have done it completely blind and looked at every infant, she probably wouldn't even have mentioned air embolism or air via
And by
nasal.
every infant, do you mean every infant which has been brought to the notice of the
Yeah.
police?
Well, even you could even argue she should look at every suspicious incident. But even if she looked at just the
You
infant,
could argue that she should search for suspicious
yeah,
incidents herself. Again, I
yeah,
would
yeah,
argue
you could
that.
argue, yeah, that would be even better. But I think
Yeah.
even if she just looked at the infants that were in the case, I
Mm,
believe if she'd have looked at it blind, she
mm.
never would have even suggested air via a nasogastric tube or air
Yeah,
embolism. I don't think that even would have come up.
I would think so too. I tend to agree with you, but I'm not a medical expert, so
But the only, I mean, I base that on, having studied it quite a bit, having spoken to a lot of
yes,
people, having heard
yes,
neonatologist views. I
yes,
mean,
exactly. I mean, that's my opinion is based on the sort of the
yeah,
same thing. The doctors I've spoken to and the ones I've heard from and what I've read about, I agree. His diagnosis is just pure fantasy.
hmm,
They're kind of sort of excuses. And I rather like Peter Hayes' analysis here, which is in witch hunts, witches always accused of killing their victims or harming their victims by using very mundane tools such as air and
hmm,
water. I mean,
hmm,
this is well, there's always air around, so you can always say something nasty was done using air.
yeah,
It's a kind
yeah,
of very cheap way to make a suggestion,
yeah,
and I call it air embolism.
yes,
That makes it
absolutely,
sound fancy, but
yeah, yeah. So I want to ask you, we touched on this very briefly, but Professor
mm,
Jane Hutton. So we have this controversial incident where Professor Jane Hutton was going to do some sort of statistical
yes,
study, and then it appears that the Crown Prosecution Service has told the police, "Oh,
yeah,
don't do that."
yes,
So what do you? I'll give you the most open-ended question I can. What are your feelings about that?
yeah. Well, I think I know the answer
Okay.
because I spoke to a high-ranking person from the CPS at the meeting in a meeting in Cambridge, where before the trial, the authors of the Royal Statistical Society report presented their report to not to the public, but to stakeholders, and we sent it to the CPS and so on. Now this was like in the summer before the trial started, so obviously too late to change anything that was going to happen. Uh, and it's a great pity we didn't start writing that report long time earlier. But I mean, I started talking to my colleagues in forensic statistics about the Letby case as soon as I knew about it. Yeah, this led to, as fast as you could imagine, actually, that a group of us were sat down and wrote a kind of a manual how to investigate such cases. It's how to investigate such cases.
Hmm.
It's the book of how to do it, which we would want any police investigating team to study carefully before starting their work. But one guy came to the meeting was a top guy from the CPS from the right part of the world, even, as well as a police expert in financial crime from that region, who was probably the only person in the police in the northwest of England who knows something about numbers, and is not scared by the word statistics.
Hmm.
It's a bit odd that she should come along. Well, I mean, sort of useless that she came along. But the CPS guy was there, and I chatted to him during the break. And now our report is not about the Lucy Letby case, but of course we wrote it in sort of preparing for or in the run up to, and everybody knew that. And so everybody knew it was sort of kind of perhaps about the Letby case, but maybe not, because maybe there was going to be absolutely, devastating, foolproof medical evidence, or even a confession
Hmm.
by that time. Who knows?
Of course.
Yeah, of course. Uh, he said to me uh, during a break, during the tea break, over a cup of tea and a nice biscuit, he said to me, "Yeah, we're not using statistics in the Lucy Letby case. It only confuses people. So they deliberately didn't use any statistics or statistician because they don't understand it themselves."
Yeah, yeah,
And so they know that possibly jury won't understand it either. And they were focused on, yeah, what we already discussed, or what I already said. We're going to handle the case event by event, baby by baby, and just looking at the medical evidence. That's the idea. And so the fact that Lucy happened to be there, I mean, the fact that we happen to be having one trial and not 25 trials is just sort of save money or whatever. And okay, and the fact that it's the same person on trial, every single one of them is just sort of by the way.
yeah. So essentially, they think the court won't understand statistics
Yes,
and the jury, but then
yeah,
they just use them anyway.
sort
So
of without. Well, yeah, they think they're not using it, but they
right,
are because it is because they're deducing a deducing causation from a correlation. I mean that it's just what they're doing.
yeah,
Yeah. And they're trying to make it so obvious that they don't need to have a statistician to put a number on it. Remember, they wanted Jane Hutton to come up with, like 1 in a million or something,
right,
right? This can't be chance. Well, the answer is it obviously isn't chance, and it obviously isn't chance because the cases were called suspicious because Lucy was there. So there is a causation, but it's in the opposite direction.
yeah, yeah,
Lucy's presence caused sort of worrisome events to be suspicious.
yeah,
That's all it is.
yeah,
So it is only statistics, but it's the wrong way around
yeah,
due to incorrect investigation.
and this is, I guess, asking you to speculate to some extent. But
Yeah,
okay, let's not ask it from this perspective of Professor Hutton. Let's say, in some unlikely twist of fate, they asked you to go
yeah,
in and do a study
yeah.
for Cheshire Police.
Of occasions.
What would you have done, and what do you think would have been the outcome of that?
Well, I would have done what is recommended in our report,
Mm,
and which is indubitably what Jane Hutton recommended, because she
mm,
was the chairwoman of the Royal Statistical Society section on statistics and law, and she's the person who actually commissioned the group of 5 people to write that report, and she contributed during the writing ideas and maybe even an appendix, I can't remember, but she's kind of one of the authors of it. So, and she was, she has a kind of ulterior motive because she was an expert for Mark MacDonald in the Ben Geen case.
mm,
And she was so angry that
mm,
the judge did not allow her to to give testimony in the court, though she'd written wonderful report, a wonderful report about biases in medical research and how to avoid them, because she wanted to point out, as was the case, that the method of police investigation in the Ben Geen case and hospital investigation, because it was the hospital did the investigation, was totally biased and liable to produce totally misleading results, which it did. And the judge said, "Yeah, but what you have to say is only common sense." No, no common sense in my court.
mm,
That was that judge's ruling. She was very angry about that.
mm.
I know, and rightfully very angry. She's very careful not to say whether she thinks Ben Geen is innocent or guilty, because she's very careful to be correct in her public pronouncements,
Mm.
unlike me. I mean, I don't, because I know there are other people who are correct. And I kind of, shot my chance. But yeah, I mean, I would sit down with the police with the RSS report and try to figure out if we can do the things which are suggested there,
Mm.
which are things we've been talking about, what you should do in a case like this. And I would want to know all the basically I would want to collect the data of the confounding factors, the other factors which we know can influence
Mm.
how many bad events there are in a nurse's shifts. And they are the main one is how many shifts she works.
Mm.
I mean, it's sort of obvious, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
If you hardly work any shifts, you're not going
Mm.
to have many bad events in them. So I would get that across. I mean, if I was called into the police and they had that spreadsheet already, I would tell them what they could do with it. It wouldn't
Yeah.
be something nice.
So if you had a fully qualified statistician,
Yeah.
do you think there's any conceivable way that any qualified statistician would go in there, do a similar thing that you've just described, and then say, well, the chart you've produced is okay?
No.
No.
No. No.
It's just
I,
plainly,
I can I
it's
can
just,
tell you that I've recently been what's the word? Contracted? I mean, no, not instructed because it's not a case. Been involved in an investigation in a Dutch hospital. Not say anything more about it at all.
sure.
But the hospital authorities were worried about an unexplained spike, right? And it's not been in the news, and probably will
Okay.
never be. And the organisation involved has done an investigation, and of course they've been talking to lawyers and also to medical experts. And one of their lawyers said we should talk to Richard Gill, and I was called in, and I've given them a Royal Statistical Society report, and they've translated it into Dutch for their use. And an investigative committee has done exactly what is recommended, and it's ongoing. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's interesting. And basically, nobody knows what was going on. If
Yeah.
you could, if you see what I mean, I think there's
Yes.
not going to be a criminal case, but there's something odd there. Yeah,
Sure. So aside from what we've discussed already, which is quite a bit,
yeah. And
is
the
that,
time is my time is almost running out.
oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, so,
I mean,
so,
could
so
we
I'll,
maybe skip the last two questions? This,
I'll end with this question and
yeah,
then we can pick it up again
yeah,
at some
yes.
point. Aside from what we've discussed already, is there anything else that the police could have done differently? So the case full drops on their desk.
Mm,
We know their level of ability and qualifications. This is not a
mm,
criticism; it's just a fact that it's
mm.
quite low. What could they or should they have done differently apart from what we've discussed?
Well, sort of everything. Uh, well, get external experts, get advice from external experts, and with experience, with like myself, I now have experience in this case. There, get experience, get advice from Jane Hutton. I mean, they should have got advice from Jane Hutton. She was well known to be a person uh, uh, with expertise in this field.
Yeah,
They and of course, they should go to some other experts in other fields too, but go to various experts in various fields, including statistics and epidemiology.
yeah,
Statistics and epidemiology. And of course, they don't know anything much about that, but they should easily be able to find some names of some people who could advise them to go to other people. And probably I mean, they need some training. They don't need training in publicity because they already paid for the training in PR.
yeah,
But they need training in selection of experts.
Yeah.
or how to judge academic CVs. You
Yeah.
know, which websites to go to if you want to find an expert. There ought to be organizations in the UK which recommend experts. Well, I suppose there are, but typically they are because didn't Dowie Evans had an acquaintance in the something or other. There's some that kind of list of experts who have helped the police in the past.
Yes. Yeah, probably. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a little bit of a tacky list to use because the experts who have helped the police in the past could well be the ones who are very good at telling the police what they want to hear.
Yeah, of course.
And you want experts who have not, to whom, well, maybe you have some experience, but and the huge problem is that actually sort of active academics in the middle of their career are not going to have the time to get involved in major court cases,
Yeah.
major crime investigations. And I'm afraid that there's a danger that you're only going to get the kind of hobbying, you know, hobby scientists who retired 10 years ago and have got a nice little business in scientific consultation. Well, like myself, I mean, I'm retired for 7 or 8 years now, and I have
Mm,
got a private consultation company, which is a fancy way of saying that I do a bit of work from time to time,
mm,
usually for free for people who knock on my door,
mm.
and only if it's interesting. But okay, I'm in the what's it called? Chamber of I'm in the listed by the Chamber of Commerce, and I got a VAT number and that kind of thing. So I filed a tax return for my consultation business. So the police would find me, and I would, in some sense, I'm in the same category as Dowie Evans,
Okay.
a guy who's retired and who's keeping up his
Yeah.
knowledge
Sure.
to some extent by hands-on experience,
Sure.
ongoing hands-on experience in interesting cases. This is like a case for me, I could have said
Yeah.
that.
Absolutely. Yeah. 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 You definitely could. I
Yeah.
think the few people have been more qualified to say that, I would say.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm beginning to think I'm kind of beginning to get close to past it because I keep forgetting so many things.
oh well, these things happen.
Yeah, this,
Yeah, so what I wanted to say lastly is just that so at the time this was referred to the police,
mm,
it was known that people at the hospital, consultants, were saying there needs to be a multidisciplinary review.
right.
And that's essentially what should have happened. And
Yes,
what actually happened is
yes,
that the police replaced,
mm,
coroner's reports, pathology, what had happened at the hospital already,
yes,
RCPCH review, with a much, much, much worse process,
yes,
and then overruled everything that had come before. And
yes.
I just don't think they understand that. I just don't think they understand
No, they
that
still don't understand that.
they haven't done a medical investigation.
No, no, they haven't. No, they haven't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think
I
that's
agree.
what
It's
needs to
very
what.
sad that, and I hope Lucy Letby is going to be let out of jail and the police are going to realize they need to do things differently next time.
Yeah. So we'll leave it there because
Okay,
I need to let you go.
you do, yeah.
So I the stuff today that I wanted to ask you about we haven't. So
Yeah, that was about statistical aspects of the insulin
in
cases, but
particular, I
a
definitely
good
want to
one to
yeah
take
because
up
I
again.
think it
Yeah.
hasn't been discussed very much.
No.
So I definitely would like to get into that, and I'll work out some
Yeah.
of the other subject matters for our part three.
Okay.
But yeah, thanks very much for joining us again today. I
You're
really
welcome.
appreciate it, and
I
we'll talk
enjoyed
again
this.
soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.
Bye now.